welcome to my channel, a place where every mystery hides a story, and every story hides a truth. In the midst of forgotten streets, footsteps echo through the silence, and the faint glow of a lamp guards secrets that refuse to die. Every clue matters. A torn letter, a fading footprint, even the sound of a clock ticking in the dark. Here, doubt becomes a puzzle, and puzzles lead us to the heart of the unknown. So prepare your mind, watch closely, and listen carefully, because the shadows are speaking, and the truth is waiting to be found. This is where every case begins. Welcome to my channel. Asterisk.
Chapter 1. The impossible crime. It was in the chill dusk of October, the year 1893, that I first heard of the strange affair on Becket Street. The fog, thick as suet, and tinged with the yellow smoke of coal fires, curled through the alleyways of London like a restless spirit. Holmes and I had returned only recently from a brief respite in Cornwall, a case of little note, save for a spirited spaniel and a vanishing wedding ring, and we had resumed our usual rhythm of quiet companionship. In Baker Street, I was at my desk, drafting a medical note, when a knock came at our door, not hesitant, but brisk and urgent, followed by the unmistakable voice of Inspector Lestrade from the landing. Holmes, lounging in his armchair with a cigarette poised delicately between his fingers, did not rise. "Do let him in, Watson," he murmured, not turning his gaze from the ceiling. "He sounds like a man who has seen a ghost, and wishes to return it to the proper authorities." I obliged, and soon Lestrade entered, his usually neat appearance rumpled, his cheeks ruddy from the cold, and his bowler hat clutched like a shield. "You'll forgive the hour, Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, "but I've come from a scene that makes no earthly sense." Holmes gestured toward the hearth. "Then you've come to the proper place. Sit, compose yourself, and tell us what has the Yard in such a fluster." Lestrade sat, casting a wary glance at me before speaking. "It's Becket Street, the old end near the river. Bit of a forgotten corner, just a few lodgings and an abandoned warehouse. We had a call this morning, woman, shrieking loud enough to raise St. Paul's. Her lodger had vanished in the night. Vanished, mind you, not fled. The door was bolted from the inside, and the windows are sealed shut with rust and age. No exit, no sign of struggle, nothing." Holmes tapped the ash into the tray with surgical precision. "A locked-room affair, then." "Worse," Lestrade said grimly. "There were noises, footsteps on the floorboards above her room, all through the night, heavy, measured. She swears they stopped at exactly 4:13 in the morning. When she went up after sunrise, the man's room was empty. Not a stick of his belongings left, not even the rug." Holmes arched an eyebrow. "An entire room spirited away in the night, under lock and key. That does pique the intellect." Lestrade leaned forward. "There's more. The constables found footprints, singular ones, only left shoes pressed perfectly into the dust from the stairwell to the window, which remains unbroken and latched from the inside. Just the left foot. Nothing more." I could not suppress a small scoff. "Surely the woman is mistaken. A product of dreams or laudanum." Holmes's voice was quiet but razor-sharp. "Watson, a woman's scream at dawn does not summon the Yard without merit. Lestrade, tell me what of the lodger himself? Name, occupation, reputation?" Lestrade hesitated. "No name on record. Paid weekly, always in cash. Quiet fellow. No visitors. The landlady said he spoke rarely, and when he did, it was always in whispers. Claimed he was a writer of some sort. She only ever saw him by lamplight. Always walked with a cane, she said, though no limp. A writer who never writes and leaves no trace," Holmes mused. "A whisperer who walks with one foot." "I brought this," Lestrade said, and produced a folded sheet of notepaper, carefully extracted from his inside coat pocket with gloved fingers. "Only thing found in the fireplace. Almost completely burned, but the constables fished it out in time." Holmes took the page and held it to the firelight. The top and bottom had charred 2 black flakes, but a line remained legible in the center, just a single sentence. "He speaks in footsteps because words betray him." A silence settled upon the room. Outside, the hooves of a hansom cab clattered dimly through the fog, and the fire hissed as it consumed a sap-laden log. Holmes stood suddenly and paced to the window, his tall silhouette framed by the dim glow of gaslight. "There is, Watson," he said softly, "a certain poetry in the absurd, an artistry in impossibility that hides only in the most devious of minds. A man does not simply vanish. A man does not leave behind a trail of only left shoes. And no sane criminal sets fire to a confession this cryptic unless he believes he's already won. He turned, and for the first time, I saw that gleam in his eye, the one I had come to associate with true danger. "Lestrade," Holmes said briskly, "I trust the scene remains untouched. The constables are holding the premises." "Yes." "Then we shall visit Beckett Street immediately. Watson, your coat." I rose at once, the thrill of the chase surging through me like the sting of cold air through the window pane. Holmes was already lacing his boots, his mind, no doubt, racing ahead to patterns unseen and riddles yet unsolved. As we stepped into the misty street below, Holmes whispered, "Remember, Watson, the man who speaks in footsteps may yet have more to say." And with that, we vanished into the fog, chasing echoes no one else could hear. Chapter 2. The arrival at Beckett Street. There are few places in London more forgotten than the eastern end of Beckett Street. It is not listed on most maps, and hardly remembered by even the cab drivers, who avoid its narrow bend for fear of striking the jagged cobbles. By the time we arrived there, the fog had thickened, blurring lamplight into halos and reducing buildings to silhouettes. The street, flanked by derelict brick walls and shuttered windows, had the feel of a stage set after the curtain had fallen, eerily silent and emptied of actors. Lestrade led the way, his boots crunching over broken glass and gravel, the gaslight flickering weakly over his shoulder. Holmes, gloved hands folded behind his back, walked with that peculiar stillness of his, the kind that suggested every muscle was listening. The house in question was number 14, a three-story terrace structure of soot-stained brick, its windows dark, save for the glow of lanterns set inside by the constables. The front door, painted a peeling red, hung slightly ajar. "Watch your step," Lestrade muttered, stepping aside for Holmes. "The landlady's waiting upstairs. Name's Mrs. Kilburn." It was she who reported the lodger missing. Holmes made no reply as he crossed the threshold, but I noticed his eyes pass over everything: the scuffed doorframe, a splatter of something dark near the skirting board, the absence of a mat. The interior was as bleak as the street outside. The hallway was narrow and lined with faded wallpaper, curling at the corners like parchment. A faint scent of damp wool and wood smoke lingered in the air. A grandfather clock stood to our left, frozen at 10 minutes past 4. Holmes stopped. "Lestrade," he said quietly, gesturing to the clock, "is this time accurate?" "No, it's been broken for years, according to Mrs. Kilburn." "Still," Holmes murmured, "a curious coincidence." We climbed the stairs, narrow, steep, and groaning beneath our weight. The second-floor landing opened onto 2 rooms, one locked, the other lit. A plump, anxious woman in a worn shawl stood just beyond the door, wringing her hands. "I told them," she said as soon as we appeared, her voice trembling. "I told them he was gone, vanished into thin air." "He did. I heard the steps all night, up and down, slow and steady. I know every creak of these boards, sir, and I swear to you, I heard no door open." Holmes inclined his head gently. "Mrs. Kilburn, you said you last heard him at precisely 4:13. She blinked. I did, sir. I remember the hour exactly. I have a habit of waking then. The footfalls stopped like a clock winding down. "Describe the lodger to me." She seemed to gather herself, tallish, pale, always wore gloves, had the manner of a foreigner, I'd say, though he spoke the king's English. Soft voice, like he was afraid of being heard. Paid on time, never gave trouble, but there was something odd. Never saw him eat, never saw him write, though he claimed to be an author. Holmes tapped his fingers together. "And when did he move in?" 3 weeks ago, sir. Turned up late one night, said he needed quiet. I don't usually take in strangers, but there was something sad in his eyes." Holmes offered a rare flicker of warmth. "Thank you, Mrs. Kilburn. That will be all for now. Watson and I shall examine the room." The woman bobbed and withdrew. Lestrade gave a short nod and gestured toward the open door. "After you, Holmes." The lodger's room was sparse, but not without signs of use. A bed with neatly folded sheets, a small writing desk bare, a chair, and a fireplace half filled with blackened paper. The rug was indeed missing, leaving behind an outline of clean boards amidst the dust. A single shoe left-footed, as Lestrade had claimed, lay in the corner beside a walking cane with a carved ivory handle. Holmes circled the room slowly, every movement deliberate. He dropped to one knee near the fireplace, withdrawing a lens from his coat and inspecting the ash. Then he rose and stepped to the window. "Unbroken," he murmured. Still latched, he turned to the floor, eyes narrowing. Watson, the footprints. Indeed, they were there, faint but discernible. A trail of left footprints only, dusty impressions leading from the bed to the window. No right shoe marks, no overlapping. They began at the rug's former edge and stopped at the sill. Lestrade grunted, as if he hopped across the room. Holmes shook his head. No, too measured, too deliberate. He knelt beside the walking stick and held it in his gloved hand, giving the carved handle a careful twist. It resisted, then gave. Inside was a hollow compartment, empty. Interesting, Holmes muttered. What do you suppose was inside? I asked. Something narrow, possibly paper, perhaps a map, perhaps instructions. He examined the cane again. A smuggler's tool, or a spy's prop. He turned toward the fireplace and removed the partially burnt scrap Lestrade had shown us earlier. Then, from his pocket, he produced a small brush and began to sift gently through the ash. After several minutes, he paused. Here, he said. He drew out a corner of parchment, barely legible, with what appeared to be a red wax seal, half melted, not standard stationery. Holmes said softly, "This is handmade Italian, I believe. Expensive, rare." Lestrade scratched his head. "You think this fellow was some sort of foreign agent?" Holmes didn't answer directly. Instead, he moved to the door and cast a long look back over the room. "Watson," he said, "what is missing?" I blinked. The rug, obviously yes, but more than that. I frowned. There are no clothes, no trunk, no books, no shaving kit, no evidence of prolonged residence. Holmes nodded. Quite, he left nothing, except precisely what he wanted us to find. He turned to Lestrade. "Have the downstairs chimney swept, and ask the postman if he ever delivered anything to this address." Lestrade frowned. "Why?" "Because," Holmes said quietly, "we are not dealing with a man who vanished. We are dealing with a man who never truly appeared." Chapter 3. The First Clues. A Scene of Deception. Grey morning deepened to a wan and cheerless afternoon as we continued our inspection of number 14 Beckett Street. Holmes had dismissed Mrs. Kilburn with a few soothing words, and Lestrade had taken his leave to begin inquiries on Holmes' instructions. That left Holmes and me alone in the lodger's room, a room that offered no sense of personality, only calculated emptiness. Holmes moved through it like a surgeon probing with precision, dismissing surface impressions in favor of those small inconsistencies which, I knew from experience, were the real conduits of truth. I stood at the window, peering down at the street below. "There's no fire escape," I said, "and even if there were, it would have left some trace scratches on the sill. Displaced soot, a loosened pane." "Indeed," Holmes replied, crouched now at the desk. "And yet the man is gone." He stood, his long fingers brushing over the empty desktop. "Observe, Watson, there is no dust on the writing desk. The rest of the room is thick with it behind the bedstead, under the chair, but this surface was wiped clean recently. But there are no papers, no inkwell, not even a blotter." "Precisely. A man claims to be a writer, maintains a desk meticulously clean, and leaves no writing at all." He turned and began to pace slowly, his keen eyes sweeping the walls, the ceiling, the skirting boards. Then he stopped suddenly and knelt again by the fireplace. "I joined him here," he said, gesturing to a loose tile at the hearth's edge. He lifted it gently, revealing a shallow hollow beneath. Inside lay a sliver of what appeared to be fine wire, no longer than a knitting needle coiled with something sticky and grey clinging to it. "Chewing gum?" I asked, wrinkling my nose. Holmes allowed himself a ghost of a smile. "A vulgar assumption, but not incorrect. A common brand, likely used to secure this wire to something." He held it to the light. "You see the faint notches? This wire was twisted and stretched, used for tension, possibly to secure a line. But what was it affixed to?" He rose and moved again to the window, examining the frame with care. Then, with a soft click of his tongue, he reached into the outer sill's groove and extracted a small brass hook embedded flush with it, wooden, nearly invisible unless one was looking for it. "There we are. You think he lowered something?" I asked. "I think," Holmes said, turning the hook over in his fingers, "that this man went to great lengths to give the impression of impossibility. This wire may have held a rope, possibly a counterbalance, but he'd still need to open the window. Unless," Holmes said quietly, "he never left at all." I frowned at him. "You believe he's still in the building?" "No," he said, moving again to the center of the room. "I believe this room was never meant to be occupied in the true sense. It is a stage, a performance, complete with misdirection. Everything here is deliberate. The rug removed to obscure something, the footprints left only with the left shoe to create confusion, the solitary shoe and cane positioned as clues. No personal items, no name, no memory. He paused by the walking stick again, his expression unreadable. And yet, I crossed to the hearth, still puzzled. But what of the noises? Mrs. Kilburn said she heard the man pacing all night. Holmes nodded. Yes, pacing, with rhythmic footfalls, each distinct, each placed deliberately. He began walking himself one step, pause, another step down the length of the floor. With each step, the boards groaned in low protest. Now listen, he said. Each step sounds slightly different. The boards here are older than the house reclaimed timber. Perhaps you hear that squeak there, and that dull thud near the wall. I nodded slowly. Mrs. Kilburn knows this house like her own breath. If someone were to learn the tone of each board, record it in their mind, even rehearse it, they could recreate the sound of walking without truly walking. But to what purpose? Holmes stopped and looked directly at me. To create an alibi without presence. To anchor suspicion to a man who had already gone or had never arrived. Footsteps are the oldest sound in a house, Watson. They carry meaning, urgency, hesitation, purpose. This man or whoever orchestrated this used sound as a substitute for being. The idea chilled me. At that moment, a light tap came at the open door. A young constable appeared, cap in hand. "Beg pardon, sir," he said. "Inspector Lestrade sent word. The postman's been found. He never delivered a thing to this house. No letters, no packages, nothing in 3 weeks." Holmes gave a sharp nod. "Thank you." The constable hesitated. "There's one more thing. Mrs. Kilburn says she remembers seeing the lodger, only from behind, always with his hat on, always ascending the stairs, never descending. She thought it odd, but never gave it a second thought." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Now that," he said, "is most instructive." When the constable had gone, I turned to him. "You think the lodger was an impostor?" "Not merely an impostor, Watson," Holmes said softly. "An illusion." He turned back to the room and stood in its center once more. "There is one final oddity. The rug. It was removed, but why? To hide footprints, I suggested, or blood." He shook his head. "No signs of either. But perhaps something else." Holmes knelt again and examined the floor where the rug had once lain. His fingers traced a narrow groove between the boards. "Ah yes, that explains much." "What do you see?" "Scratches, thin, even, parallel. Something heavy was dragged here, possibly a case, or a box. Wooden recently outed, judging by the faint shine near the grain." He stood, brushing off his knees. "Watson, the man who spoke in footsteps has left us a great deal to consider, but not a single truth. Not yet." I looked again at the vacant room, the carefully chosen clues, and the oppressive silence now pressing against the walls. "There's something deeply wrong here, Holmes," I said quietly. "Yes," he agreed, "and it is not over." Chapter 4. The gathering of suspects the following morning was brighter, though no less cold, and the fog had begun to lift in streaks from the rooftops of Becket Street. Holmes and I stood once more in the sitting room of number 14, the lodger's room sealed for the moment, while Lestrade busied himself with the task Holmes had requested, bringing in those few individuals whose lives had, however faintly, touched the vanished man. "It is often in the minor players," Holmes murmured as he examined his watch, "that the play's true shape is revealed." He paced as he spoke, eyes glinting with that curious brightness which always attended his concentration. "Each person we speak to today may offer only crumbs, but, Watson, you have seen how even the smallest crumb, properly traced, leads us to the loaf." The door creaked open. Lestrade entered first, followed by a lean, balding man in a coal-streaked coat and fingerless gloves. He smelled faintly of grease and burnt oil. "Mr. Harker," Lestrade said, "the night watchman from the warehouse adjacent, says he might have heard or seen something." Holmes turned to face him. "You were on duty last night?" "Every night, sir," said Harker. "Don't sleep regularly anymore. My bones don't let me." "And did you see the lodger at number 14? "Never, sir. Not his face, anyhow. Heard him, though. That's why I came. I hear things." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "Go on." "Each night, around the same time near 4 o'clock, I'd hear these sounds, footsteps, precise, pacing, always upstairs in that house. But there's something wrong with them, sir." "Wrong in what way?" Harker shifted, visibly uncomfortable. They echoed wrong, not like real steps, like someone imitating the sound to measured, to hollow. It wasn't natural. Holmes regarded the man with interest. Did you ever see light from the windows? No, sir. Curtains drawn, and heavy ones at that. Did you ever hear a voice? No voice, but sometimes I thought I heard scratching. Holmes paused. Scratching? Harker nodded, faint like from inside the walls. Thank you. Mr. Harker, you may wait outside. As the watchman was led out, Holmes turned to Lestrade. How many more? 3, Lestrade replied. Mrs. Kilburn insisted we speak with her niece, who helps her with the cleaning. And there's the landlord, Mr. Bletchley, lives in Southwark. Came by when I sent word. Also, the cobbler from the corner name's Ezra Flint. Sold the lodger his shoes. Let's have the niece. A thin girl of perhaps 17 entered, clutching a shawl that dwarfed her slight frame. Her eyes darted nervously between Holmes and Lestrade. Holmes asked, Emily, sir, you helped clean the lodger's room? She nodded. Only twice. He didn't like people coming in. Did you ever speak to him? Only once. Asked if I could leave the tea on the tray. He said no, didn't want anything. Voice was soft, kind of tired. Holmes leaned forward slightly. And what did you notice in his room? Emily hesitated. It was strange, sir. There was a smell. Describe it. Like medicine, bitter, and something else. Like old coins. Holmes's brows twitched. Metallic. Yes, sir. And once, when I went in early, I found a matchbox on the desk. Opened it, 'cause I thought it was empty, but there was a little scrap of cloth inside. Red, and stitched with something. Did you keep it? No, sir. I left it where it was. Holmes nodded slowly. You've been very helpful, Emily. She curtsied and exited quickly. Holmes said nothing for a long moment, fingers steepled. Then, the scent, bitter and metallic, possibly a compound ether, or blood, I suggested quietly. Holmes gave no reply, and Lestrade brought in the next man, Mr. Bletchley, the landlord, a wide-shouldered fellow with a banker's mustache and tobacco-stained cuffs. He looked as though he'd been summoned from sleep and resented the interruption. I'll say this straight, he began. I don't know a thing about the man, except he paid 3 weeks in advance, and never bothered me. Quiet lodgers are the best lodgers. Holmes raised an eyebrow. You never met him? Only once. The night he arrived, paid in sovereigns, British Mint. Bletchley hesitated. Didn't look close. Gold's gold, ain't it? And how did he find your property? Letter. Said he was recommended. No name given. Just the money in an envelope. And a note. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Do you still have it? No. Threw it out. I see. And you've never seen him leave the house? No. But that's not odd. The people who come to Becket Street don't want to be seen. If I had to guess, I'd say he was hiding from what? I don't know. And I didn't care. Holmes regarded him with quiet contempt. Thank you, Mr. Bletchley. When the landlord had gone, the final visitor entered. Ezra Flint was a stooped man with enormous ears and bright, bird-like eyes. He rubbed his hands together as though in perpetual anticipation. I know the shoes, he chirped. Unusual request. Paid me extra for the 2 left shoes. Both size 9. Holmes's eyes lit up. 2 left shoes. Yes, sir. Told me he had a condition. Orthopedic irregularity, he called it. Brought in the right shoe to match. Odd fella. Holmes stepped forward. This right shoe, do you still have it? Gave it back to him with the pair. But the sole was worn oddly. The heel was carved, looked like it had a slot in it. Holmes's voice was quiet, like it contained something. Could have never asked. I make shoes. I don't solve puzzles. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Mr. Flint. That will be all. When the room was finally empty, Holmes stood motionless for a long time. Then he turned to me. 2 left shoes, Watson. Scratching sounds. A shoe with a hidden compartment. A scent of chemicals. A rug was removed to hide grooves, and footsteps performed like a metronome. We are circling something theatrical, something deceptive. And the man, Holmes's eyes darkened. He may not be a man at all. Or, if he is, he may not be the one we think. He crossed to the window, then spoke almost absently. Watson, what do you know of ventriloquism? Chapter 5. First suspects. The red herring. The morning after our interviews. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent during breakfast. He consumed his toast with mechanical precision, eyes distant, mind occupied. It was only after I had set down my second cup of tea that he rose, retrieved his violin from the corner, and began to play wandering notes that moved from melancholy to mischief and back again. I waited until he had finished the final phrase before speaking. Holmes, you mentioned ventriloquism yesterday. Do you believe someone was imitating the lodger's presence? Holmes set the violin aside carefully. Not merely imitating, Watson. Crafting a performance, a simulation so convincing that even footsteps, an inherently physical act, became sound without substance. A conjuring trick, a red herring, most likely, and not the only one. Just then, a knock interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram on a silver tray. Holmes opened it and read in silence. Then he handed it to me. From Lestrade Yard received tip. Local forger, possibly linked to vanishing lodger name. Conrad Litchfield, operated out of Fenchurch Street, arrested, 1890, released March this year, sighted near Beckett Street, 2 weeks ago. Holmes was already pulling on his coat. Come, Watson, let us meet this ghost from prison past. We arrived at the Fench Street address by midday. A crumbling boarding house sandwiched between a pawnbroker and a shuttered tea shop. The landlady was a tough-eyed woman with a grating voice and a nose that twitched at every sentence. Litchfield, she said, arms folded, stayed here a fortnight ago, didn't care for the other tenants, always fiddling with ink and papers at odd hours, complained about noise no one else heard. Then he vanished, left without paying his final week. Did he leave anything behind? Holmes asked. Only this, she said, disappearing into a cupboard and returning with a yellowed scrap of paper. Holmes examined it. The edges were singed, and the surface bore an intricate flourish of foreign-looking script. Forgery, Holmes murmured, but not currency. This is mimicry of language, not genuine letters, but imitations of them. Symbols meant to suggest writing, a code. I asked. No, he replied, tucking the paper into his coat. A mask, something meant to appear important, like a magician's puff of smoke. Do you believe Litchfield is our vanished lodger? Holmes shook his head. A convenient suspect, yes, known to the authorities. Touched the edges of this case. Certainly, but too clumsy. He mimics truth, but lacks the discipline to maintain illusion. I suspect we are meant to chase him. A red herring, I concluded. Indeed, we departed the boarding house and began the short walk toward the nearest cab rank. Holmes, I said after a pause, are you suggesting someone is using the police's own instincts against them? Precisely, Watson. Scotland Yard sees a known forger near a strange disappearance and elungiger for resolution. But the case resists resolution. It repels simple conclusions. And do you know what else repels simplicity? I frowned. You'll tell me, I'm sure. Stagecraft, Holmes replied. Illusion, trickery, theatrics. He fell silent as we boarded the cab, and gave the address for the yard. We were met there by Lestrade, who looked both pleased and slightly defensive. Well, he said, we've issued a search warrant for Litchfield's old haunts. He's a slippery one, could be hiding under another name. Or, he could be precisely where the real criminal wants us looking. Holmes said mildly. Lestrade frowned. You don't believe he's involved? Oh, I believe he may be involved, Holmes said, but not in the central sense. He may have been a tool, or a decoy. Lestrade shook his head. You've got more patience than I do. Holmes smiled faintly. Patience, Inspector, is the currency in which truth is bought. As we turned to leave, a young constable rushed down the corridor toward us. Begging your pardon, sir, he called, handing Lestrade a note. From the morgue, sir. They've had a body brought in from the river. No ID, but matched one of the descriptions you sent out. Lestrade read the note, then looked up grimly. Male, mid-30s, tall, pale complexion, found floating near Wapping Wharf, waterlogged and battered. But the undertaker found a cane strapped to his leg with twine. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A cane, yes, Lestrade confirmed. Carved handle. Ivory, they think. No other possessions. We were in the morgue half an hour later. The body had been laid out on a stone slab, the river's marks still upon him. His features were distorted, but something in the length of the limbs. The cut of the jaw suggested familiarity. Lestrade stepped back. Well, I suppose that answers one question. But Holmes did not move. He studied the corpse with silent intensity, then knelt beside the slab and examined the cane, which had been placed nearby. This is the same as the one from the room, I said. Holmes nodded, then lifted the cane, twisting the handle. It opened again to reveal a hollow core this time, not empty. He extracted a thin roll of paper, soaked and barely legible. Lestrade, he said quietly, Have this dried and examined. No ink should be lost. I suspect it is more than a signature. Lestrade took the scroll with gloved hands. You still think this isn't our man? Holmes's gaze lingered on the corpse. I think someone wanted us to find a dead man with the right cane, but not the right soul. As we departed the morgue, Holmes muttered, half to himself, the more a trick resembles reality, the more dangerous it becomes. And this is a master illusionist's work. Chapter 6. The Secret Clue, a Hidden Inconsistency. It was late afternoon by the time we returned to Baker Street. Holmes's mood was unreadable as he removed his overcoat and stood at the window, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Outside, the sky had darkened, a veil of grey clouds casting shadows across the rooftops of London. The death at Wapping Wharf had shaken something loose in Holmes, not fear, nor certainty, but a renewed intensity, as though the mystery had entered a sharper, more dangerous phase. He spoke at last. There's something amiss, Watson. Something just beneath the surface, like a ripple under calm water. You doubt the identity of the corpse. I doubt everything about it, he said. From the timing to the location, most of our lead out the cane. But it matched, I insisted. Even the hidden compartment. Surely such a detail cannot be a coincidence. True, but tell me this. If you had gone to the trouble of hiding a message inside a cane, would you abandon it in a lodging house, and then carry a second one, identical in every detail, on your person? I frowned. You're suggesting to canes. Holmes nodded slowly. Either that, or someone made a copy of the first, a replica, down to its mechanism. But to what end? To confuse the investigation, perhaps, or perhaps to signal something. The cane left in the room was a message for us. The one on the corpse, well, that is a message for someone else. He moved to his desk and withdrew the paper taken from the hollow cane found at the morgue. It had since been dried, and though water damage had blurred much of the ink, one portion remained legible, a crude sketch, almost like a floor plan, marked with a curious triangle at the center. Next to it, written in hurried scrawl, was a phrase, "Where the mirror forgets its face." Holmes tapped it gently. A cipher, possibly a location. A mirror, I mused. What does that mean? It means, Holmes said, we need to speak to someone who understands both reflections and deceptions. Someone theatrical. By evening, we found ourselves once again navigating the gaslit corridors of Covent Garden's lesser-known theatres. Holmes had arranged a brief appointment with a contact of his, Leopold Vexley, a retired illusionist of some renown who now served as a consultant to stage productions and music halls. His dressing room was draped in heavy velvet, the scent of grease paint and dust hanging in the air like perfume. "Sherlock," Vexley exclaimed, rising from a chair and sweeping off his cap. "Still chasing ghosts in polished boots, I see. Ghosts with particularly clever footprints this time," Holmes replied. "I need your thoughts on a phrase." He handed over the paper. Vexley squinted. "Where the mirror forgets its face. Sounds like one of mine. But no, I've never used it. Poetic, theatrical. But I'd wager it's not a metaphor. You believe it references something real?" "Most likely. There's a stage illusion we used to call the faceless reflection. It relied on angled glass and controlled light. You'd look in what seemed like a mirror and see nothing but the room behind you. No reflection." I leaned in. "Is that possible? Or with the right angle and lighting? We used it at the old theatre era, part of a disappearing act." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The theatre Eremises, it's still intact." Vexley chuckled. "Closed for years. Fell into disuse after the fire. Burned the east wing, though the main stage survived. Still standing, last I heard. No one goes in now. Superstitious nonsense about a woman vanishing mid-performance. Then it's exactly the place we're looking for," Holmes said. We arrived at the decrepit theatre near midnight. The facade was crumbling, but the structure remained a monument to forgotten grandeur. Holmes produced a lockpick from his coat, and within moments, we had slipped through the side entrance into darkness. Inside, the silence was near perfect. Our footsteps echoed faintly on the dust-covered boards of the stage as we passed through what remained of the backstage area. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and mildew. Holmes held a lantern in one hand, sweeping it slowly across the walls. "There," he said, pointing toward a tarnished wall panel framed in gilt. "A mirror, or what appears to be one." But it was not a mirror. Upon close inspection, it was a glass panel angled inward, backed by a shadowy space. We stepped behind it and discovered a hidden passage, a narrow corridor stretching into darkness. Holmes's voice was hushed. Vexley was right. the faceless reflection. Someone repurposed it perhaps recently. The passage led to a cramped chamber filled with remnants of stagecraft tropes, trapdoors, and what appeared to be an ancient lantern apparatus. But what arrested our attention was a desk in the corner, upon which sat a notebook, its pages filled with strange, looping symbols. Forgery practice, Holmes said, flipping through it, a hand perfecting the shape of writing without the meaning. Litchfield's, or someone else's. He paused at a page near the back, where, beneath a series of faux signatures, was the triangle symbol from the note in the cane. Watson, I believe we've found where the illusion was built, but not the illusionist, I replied. Holmes nodded grimly. No, but he's close. And now we've stepped behind the curtain. Chapter 7. Echoes. Through the curtain the passage beneath the stage had long been abandoned, but it bore the residue of recent trespass. Though the dust lay thick across the floorboards, faint footprints could be made out in the lantern light shuffled, hesitant, as if the visitor did not wish to be followed. Holmes crouched low, examining the prints with his usual note the pattern, Watson. Rubber soles, likely from a modern boot, and these indentations here one slightly deeper than the other. An uneven gait, possibly an injury, or a limp masked for public appearance. We followed the trail through the narrow corridor, which wound like a serpent through the underbelly of the theatre. Pipes protruded from the walls like skeletal arms, and water dripped from the ceiling with soft, rhythmic splashes that echoed like applause in an empty hall dot at the end of the passage. We came upon a wrought iron door sealed with a rusted bolt. Holmes slid it open with effort, revealing a space beyond that bore no resemblance to the theatrical splendor above. This room was crude, almost industrial. Coal bins lined the walls, and a thick pipe ran along the ceiling. But what drew our eyes was the wooden table at the center and what sat atop it, a collection of identical canes, 8 of them. Each one bore the same ivory handle, the same brass ferrule, and upon inspection, the same concealed compartment. Good Lord, I murmured, they've been manufacturing duplicates. Holmes nodded grimly. Not merely to confuse the authorities. These canes are vessels. Each one likely contains a piece of a larger message, smuggled through different hands to evade detection. He lifted one of the canes and unscrewed the head. Inside, instead of a paper, was a slim metal cylinder with fine grooves etched along its sides like the barrels of a music box. Encoding, Holmes whispered. Ingenious. The message is embedded not in ink, but in sound. Played through the proper mechanism, this cylinder would reveal its secret in melody or Morse. I examined another cane. Inside it, a folded paper had been carefully sealed with wax. Breaking it open revealed a single word, albinus. I turned to Holmes. A name, possibly, or a code name, white, albino, a reference to appearance, or perhaps a cipher keyword. He seemed about to speak further when a sound broke the husher faint creak, followed by the unmistakable whisper of a foot dragging against wood. Holmes extinguished the lantern instantly, plunging us into darkness. We stood silent, motionless. The sound came again, closer now, a slow, deliberate tread across the passage we had just traversed. Holmes leaned toward me, voice low. Someone followed us in, likely hoping to recover one of these canes. Should we confront them? Not yet. Let's see who our phantom is. Holmes reached into his coat and withdrew his revolver, pressing it into my hand. You wait here. I'll circle round behind. Before I could protest, he vanished into the darkness, gliding along the wall with the precision of a shadow. I stood still, heart pounding, the pistol cool in my hand. The footsteps grew louder. A shape emerged at the doorframe, tall, cloaked in darkness. Whoever it was moved cautiously, head tilted, as if listening for some unseen danger. The intruder stepped into the room, pausing as their eyes adjusted to the dim. Then, they made for the table. I held my breath as the figure reached toward one of the canes. Suddenly, Holmes's voice rang out behind him. Step away, sir, or I swear the next sound you hear shall not be my voice. The man froze, then slowly turned. In the lantern's returning glow, I saw a thin, pale face with a sharp chin and colorless eyes. His hair was closely cropped, almost white, giving him an ethereal, ghost-like appearance. I have no quarrel with you, the man said. His voice was surprisingly soft, but there was steel beneath it. Then explain your interest in these canes, Holmes demanded. The man's lips twisted. I came to destroy them. Rather late for that, Holmes replied coolly. You've risked much to enter a place you clearly know well. I built the mirror, the man said suddenly. The faceless reflection. It was mine, but it was never meant for this. Holmes's brows lifted. Ah, then you are the artisan behind the illusion. I was, he said, lowering his eyes, before it was stolen, before the Theatre Aramis was turned into a tomb of secrets. Holmes stepped forward, and the name Albina, is it yours? The man hesitated, then gave a slow nod. It was the name they gave me, in the letters, in the plans. I don't know who they are, I only know they used me. Used you for what? To build concealments, boxes, devices to carry messages, to hide things in plain sight. I was told it was for a performance, that the illusion would be the message itself. But then people began to vanish, and then Litchfield disappeared. Did you kill him? No, Albinus said, with quiet defiance. But I know who did. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And who was that? Albinus looked to the far wall. A man named R. von Kinlan, a master of disguise. He was the one who recruited Meacheming, elegant, but colder than a winter's sea. Litchfield uncovered something about Kinlan's past, something that would destroy the entire operation. I believe Kinlan silenced him. Then Kinlan is our quarry, Holmes murmured. Albinus nodded. But be warned, he wears faces like gloves, and he's watching. Holmes turned to me, eyes gleaming. Come, Watson, our masquerade has only begun. Chapter 8. The Man with 100 Faces. Morning broke grey and silent over Baker Street. The sky smeared with a dull frost that hung low like an unsettled spirit. Holmes sat at the breakfast table, untouched, toast in hand, his eyes distant, yet not at rest. The events of the night, the hidden corridor, the cache of twin canes, and the enigmatic figure known only as Albanused, stirred something within him. Not an alarm. No, Holmes rarely entertained such a pedestrian emotion, but focus, ruthless and complete. I poured his tea without asking. He did not thank me, but accepted the cup with a nod, his long fingers drumming lightly against the porcelain. Mrs. Hudson had been persuaded gently, but firmly, to allow Albinus to rest in our spare room. He had been given broth, a blanket, and a warning that Sherlock Holmes tolerated secrecy no longer than necessity demanded. Holmes finally spoke. Watson, the name R. von Kinlan appears in no census, no registry, no Actors' Guild, and no criminal archive in London. A ghost in the fog, an alias, almost certainly, but an alias used with surgical precision. If Albinus is to be believed, and I think he is, then Kinlan is a master of identities, not merely a thief of names, but of faces, demeanor, and accent. A man like that can walk into a theatre one night as the stagehand and leave as the lead actor, a professional imposter. Then, Holmes nodded, pushing away the tea. One who kills to remain invisible. That makes him dangerous. A knock came at the door. Before Mrs. Hudson could answer it, Holmes was already halfway there. He flung it open to reveal a young constable, flushed and breathless. Mr. Holmes, he gasped. You're wanted at the Aramis Theatre again. Another man's gone missing. Who? Holmes asked sharply. The set painter, sir, Edward Moffat. According to the company, he left for lunch and never returned. His satchel was found backstage untouched. Any signs of struggle? No, sir, but this was left in his locker. He handed Holmes a folded sheet of parchment. Holmes opened it. A single phrase had been typed across it in red ink. All capitals. I am the mask that breathes. Holmes stared at the paper for a long moment. Then he reached for his coat. Come, Watson. The stage awaits. The Aramis was empty when we arrived. Eerily so. No bustling crew, no bustling actors, not even the orchestra tuning in the pit. Just the echo of our footfalls as we stepped onto the darkened stage, where the heavy curtains hung like the eyelids of a corpse. Holmes moved with careful purpose, stopping briefly at the props table before heading backstage. He peered into dressing rooms, examined makeup trays, and checked for any inconsistencies among costumes, anything that might suggest a recent intruder had passed through. In the corridor leading to the rear stairwell, he paused. This was where Moffat would have passed. Yes, he asked the constable who had accompanied us. Indeed, sir. To the staff canteen below. Holmes crouched by the wall. Fresh scuff marks. 2 pairs of shoes, one heavier, possibly boots, and the other smaller, slicker, like a dancer's slipper. He stood brushing off his coat. We must assume Kinlan has struck again, and more than that. He's escalating. These disappearances are not random. They serve a purpose, one piece at a time. Each man who vanished knew a portion of the theatre's secrets. Litchfield knew the upper stage rigging, Albinus, the illusory mirror. Moffat, the scenery. The facade, a pattern. Then, I murmured, indeed, someone is building towards something masked behind performance. But what? Holmes turned to the constable. Is there any one person here who has remained untouched by the disappearances? The constable thought. The wardrobe mistress, perhaps. Miss Alira Damsel. She's been here for years, never missed a day. Then she may have seen more than she realizes. Holmes said, take us to her. Alira Damsel was a wiry woman in her 60s, with long silver hair twisted into a bun like a coiled rope. Her fingers were stained with dye, and her spectacles rested low on her nose as she hemmed a crimson waistcoat. She did not stop her work as we entered. I knew you'd come eventually, she said, voice thin and deliberate. You've seen something, Holmes said simply. She looked up. Seen? No. Heard? Perhaps. Felt? Certainly. This place is no longer a theater, Mr. Holmes. It is a charade. The real performance happens behind the scenes, where the script is unwritten and the players vanish before curtain call. Holmes studied her intently. You speak of She nodded, though I never knew his true name. He came 6 months ago, said he was researching a role, charming as a polished gem. But his eyes were always watching, as though memorizing your soul. And then he disappeared. Only, I don't believe he ever left. Holmes leaned forward. You think he's still here? I think he's many people. I've seen faces that do not match voices, movements that belong to other men. Once, I saw our lighting operator step into the hall, and moments later, I saw him again at the back of the theater, wiping grease from hands that were far too clean. Holmes's lips parted slightly. A rotation of roles. Kinlan wears the faces of the cast, like a shifting fog. And he's clever, she continued, always watching from the wings. I've found masks in drawers that don't belong to anyone. Wigs are not in the production's palette. And a coat, long, black, with hidden pockets. I locked it in the prop trunk. Show me. She led us to a chest beneath the costume loft, unlocking it with a creaky key. She revealed a heavy black coat folded neatly beneath false swords and discarded velvet dot. Holmes lifted it carefully, inspecting its lining. Inside was a sewn compartment. He slit it open with his penknife. Within, folded with exacting care, was a single photograph, but we gathered round. It showed a Manlin, tall and unsmiling. He wore a white half-mask, his visible eye fixed on the camera with unnerving clarity. Behind him, the set of the Aramis stage could be seen, just out of focus. Holmes turned it over. Written on the back in red ink were the words, "The final act begins." Chapter 9. The blood in the balcony Vening fell over London with an uneasy hush. The clouds above the city hung like a velvet curtain awaiting its cue. From the vantage of the Aramis Theatre's upper balcony, the city lights glimmered faintly, but within the theatre itself, the shadows had deepened. Holmes stood beneath the ghost light on the stage, the black coat and red-inked photograph laid reverently upon a prop table. His eyes didn't leave the half-masked face in the image. He dares to declare an opening act, Holmes murmured. And now, I suspect, the play turns bloody. I approached quietly. And yet we still know so little of his motive. Is it vengeance, obsession, or simply mastery of deception for its own sake? Holmes tapped the photograph. Men do not wear masks without reason, Watson. For Kinlan, the mask is not simply a disguise, it is a manifesto. He vanishes behind identities as an artist vanishes behind brushstrokes. But tonight, I intend to tear the canvas. A creaking step from above drew our attention. Holmes turned sharply. Someone's in the balcony. We moved swiftly through the winding stairs that led behind the boxes, past the dust-choked passages lined with aging opera banners. The constable posted near the front entrance had not seen anyone enter, and yet now came the unmistakable rhythm of footfalls above, slow, deliberate, pausing at intervals, as if the walker wished to be heard, or perhaps mimicked. We emerged into the shadowy recess of the upper balcony. From below, it would appear empty, but here at the far edge, just above the stage's left wing, a figure stood, gazing over the rail. Holmes raised a hand to stop me. We crouched low behind the box seating's velvet curtain. The figure, slim, motionless, seemed almost like a stage mannequin, until it tilted its head slowly, listening. Holmes drew his revolver. We approached carefully. No sudden moves. We stepped forward. The figure did not turn. As we closed the gap, Holmes called out, "You've chosen an excellent seat, Mr. Kinlan, but I'm afraid the theatre is closed." Still no motion. Holmes stepped beside him and turned the man gently by the shoulder. It was not Kinlan. It was Edward Moffat, the missing painter, sat propped unnaturally on the velvet-cushioned rail, his eyes wide open, mouth parted as if in mid-sentence but lifeless. A single, deep stab wound bloomed crimson through his waistcoat. The handle of a palette knife protruded from his chest, pinned to his lapel. A theatre ticket, Box B, opening night, written across it in red ink. The final brushstroke bleeds. Holmes grimaced. He's toying with us. I examined the wound. He's been dead for no more than an hour. Rigor is beginning, but the blood is still fresh. Holmes was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to the empty stage below. Look at the placement. A corpse posed in the box, as if watching a play. A note, the symbolism. Moffat was a painter. The weapon, a palette knife. Kinlan assigns deaths with poetic flair. This is theatre to him, an art form, in which he must be both actor and author. We descended in grim silence, alert now for any sign of movement. Holmes gathered the others. The constable, and Miss O'Leary entered the costume loft. The tension in the air was palpable. Alira sat wringing her ink-stained fingers, while Albinus refused to meet anyone's gaze. We must assume, Holmes began, that Kinlan is still among us, and more than that, he is likely still inside the Aramis. Albinus looked up suddenly, but how could he? The doors are locked, the stage entrance is watched. Unless, Holmes cut in, he never left. Recall your hidden corridor. If Kinlan has learned every crawlspace, trapdoor, and costume alcove in this theatre, as UDD needs no audience to escape. He is the scenery. Then what are we to do? Elira whispered. We turn the theatre into a trap, Holmes said. If Kinlan wishes to stage a grand performance, then let us raise the curtain. Within an hour, Holmes had the constable wire a brief message to Scotland Yard, calling for a small team to secure the exits discreetly. A plan formed. We would stage a final rehearsal, one last performance before the supposed opening night. Holmes's reasoning was sound. Kinlan was escalating. He thrived on symbolism, timing, and theatrical irony, and if he had indeed murdered 3 men, then his climax was fast approaching. We positioned actors as decoys. Holmes assigned them roles, a mock Hamlet scene to draw Kinlan's attention. He ordered every trapdoor rigging line and lighting aperture tested. Then he turned to me. You and I will take opposite wings. Watch every shadow. If Kinlan reveals himself, he'll do it here, in the theatre, under his chosen light. And if he wears another's face? I asked. He cannot fake everything, Holmes said grimly. Not forever. As the stage lights glowed faintly amber, and the actors stumbled through a half-hearted rendition of To Be or Not to Be, I stood behind the red curtain of stage left, pistol loaded and nerves taut. The theatre seemed to exhale with every line spoken. Boards creaked, drapes swayed. Somewhere above, a loose pulley groaned with strain. Then dash motion. A figure ducked from behind the rear set wall, slinking toward the prop trunk Holmes had earlier examined. I moved closer, careful not to make a sound. The man opened the trunk, removed the black coat that same coat and pulled from its lining a fresh mask, white smooth, curved to match the face of the man in the photograph. Kinlan. My heart thudded, but I did not move. Holmes's orders had been clear. Do not act until he acts. Let him believe he is unseen. Let him perform. Kinlan pulled the mask over his face and stepped into the light. The final act had begun. Chapter 10. The Face in the Firelight. The moment Kinlan stepped into the stage lights, the entire theatre seemed to still. The audience of scattered decoys froze midline, sensing, perhaps instinctively, that something had shifted. A presence carefully cloaked until now had emerged from shadow into performance. From my vantage in the wing, I held my breath. Kinlan was clad in the same black coat from the photograph, his mask bone white and flawless, save for the slightest crimson brushstroke across the jawline, an artist's final touch. His gloved hands moved with deliberate grace, not like a man creeping in fear, but like a performer answering his cue. He turned to face the stage, now empty save for the ghostlight's dull glow, and stepped forward one slow stride after another until he stood at the very center of the boards. Then he raised his arms, as if to embrace the invisible audience. A hush fell again. From the opposite wing, Holmes emerged into view, calm, upright, revolver at his side. I had wondered, Holmes said, voice ringing with eerie clarity, whether the mask would finally appear without invitation. Bravo, "Mr. Kinlan, you've taken your bow." Kinlan tilted his head in mock acknowledgement. He said nothing. "You murdered Edward Moffat an hour ago," Holmes continued. "Staged him like a critic you hoped to impress posthumously. And yet I wager that you didn't see him as a rival. You saw him as incomplete, unworthy of the theatre you imagined. That's why you posed him as an audience member. You needed him to witness your final act. Pity he could not applaud still." Kinlan said nothing. Holmes stepped closer, removed the mask. Kinlan raised a hand slowly, not to comply, but to reach into his coat. Holmes's arm tensed, the revolver rising a fraction. But instead of a weapon, Kinlan withdrew a folded piece of parchment. He unfolded it and held it outward, a script. Holmes took it cautiously. I stepped from the wing, revolver drawn. Joining him, Elira and Albinus appeared at the rear of the theatre. Eyes wide, Holmes read aloud. "Final act, Scene 1. The detective confronts the phantom. Words exchanged like dueling blades. The mask, a mirror. The theatre, a tomb." A chill passed over me. Holmes crumpled the page. "You've written your ending, Kinlan, but you failed to account for one detail. Reality." He gestured to me. "Dr. Watson will take your mask now, and Scotland Yard will take you after that." For the first time, Kinlan moved with intent. His left hand flicked toward his belt, where a small, gleaming object glinted a trigger. "Down!" Holmes shouted. I tackled him from behind, just as the stage beneath Kinlan's feet erupted. Smoke billowed, a thunderous crack shook the boards, and a portion of the stage collapsed inward in a burst of shattered wood and black powder. A trapdoor? No, an explosive rigging of Kinlan's own design had opened the floor like a magician's trick gone mad. I hit the ground, coughing through smoke and splinters. When I looked up, Kinlan was gone. Holmes stood with his coat torn, a deep gash on his temple, eyes blazing with fury. "He's fled through the understage." We gave chase instantly, descending into the guts of the theatre. The catacombs beneath the Aramis were narrow, choking with dust, and full of warped doors and half-crumbled props from plays past. It smelled of mildew, old fire, and oil paint's long dry dot. Our footsteps echoed until suddenly they did not. Holmes held up a hand. We paused, a faint squelch, then, breathing, not from us. He turned sharply and yanked open a door behind a mound of discarded scenery. There, huddled in the flickering glow of a broken lantern, sat James Fenwood, the missing stage manager. His eyes were wide with terror, his coat stained with dried blood. One hand was clamped around his ribs. "Mr. Fenwood," I exclaimed, kneeling. "You're alive." I couldn't move," he gasped. "He stabbed me, left me here, said I would witness the theatre's rebirth." Holmes crouched low, scanning him. "You saw him Did he speak?" Fenwood nodded weakly. He kept quoting lines. "Shakespeare, Poe, the play's the thing," he said. Then he vanished down the old flood tunnel. Holmes turned to me grimly. "He's heading for the river, but that tunnel hasn't been used in decades," I said. "It could collapse." "All the better for him," Holmes replied. "He counts on chaos." We supported Fenwood back toward the stage, where constables were now flooding in. Elira ran to us, her face pale. "Did you get him?" Holmes shook his head. "Not yet, but his curtain call draws near." He turned to the inspector, now arriving on the scene. "Station men at every access point along the Thames. He'll emerge somewhere upstream if he survives. But how will we recognize him?" the inspector asked. "If he removes the mask." Holmes looked back toward the shattered stage. "He may change faces, but he cannot change rhythm. Listen for the footsteps that don't belong. He walks as if on stage every motion performed, every pause rehearsed. And if he slips away?" I asked. Holmes's voice dropped. "Then he writes again. Another act, another audience." We stood in silence as the ghost light flickered faintly above the rubble, casting long shadows of the players who remained. Chapter 11. The Portrait in the River Fog. The fog over the Thames had thickened by morning, settling over the river like a great muffler of silence. From the embankment at Blackfriars, we could see no more than a dozen yards into the water before all dissolved into blank grey. The police launched patrols slowly along the banks, their lanterns swinging like hesitant eyes, casting broken light across the ripples. Holmes stood motionless, gloved hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on a point where the fog seemed just slightly less dense. "He will surface," he murmured, "one way or another. The tunnel from the Aramis ends somewhere in this vicinity, an abandoned drainage built into the old river wall. It was once a flood release channel. If he timed his escape with the tide, he could emerge almost silently. I stood beside him, weary and cold, the events of the night still vibrating through my bones. Kinlan's disappearance had been more than theatrical. It had been planned with a craftsman's precision, an understanding not just of escape, but of how to leave an impression. Smoke, illusion, silence, and now, the fog. Could he have drowned? I asked. Holmes didn't turn. Men like Kinlan seldom surrender to chance. He would have prepared flares, ropes, even false passageways. He builds exit strategies as other men build alibis. We moved down the embankment, toward the narrow pier beside the old candle warehouse. Inspector Doran had stationed 2 constables there, one of whom now gestured to us with some urgency. "A woman, sir," he called. She claimed she saw something. The woman was hunched in a tattered shawl, her breath misting in the cold. She clutched a canvas bundle to her chest, smudged with river water and something darker. Her name, she told us, was Mabel Dritch, a ragpicker who combed the river edge for anything she might sell. And this morning, before the sun had fully risen, she'd found something wedged beneath the beams of the lower dock. Holmes gently took the bundle from her, unwrapped it carefully. Within was a portrait oil on canvas, remarkably well preserved, despite the damp. The face, though somewhat smeared, was unmistakable. A man with deep-set eyes, angular cheekbones, and a faint sneer painted with unsettling precision. Edward Moffat. Holmes studied the painting in silence. "This was painted by Kinlan," he said at last. I was puzzled. "Why dispose of it now?" "Because he's finished with it," Holmes replied. "Kinlan views the world as a stage victim, a character. Moffat's part is done, and so, the portrait must be cast away. It's not merely disposal, it's closure, an artist's way of stepping to the next canvas." He turned to Mabel. "Did you see anyone?" She nodded, hesitating. "A man, tall, wrapped in something black, came from the arches just before dawn, dropped the bundle, then slipped into the fog. Quiet, like a ghost." "Which direction?" She pointed east, toward Lambeth. Holmes handed her a sovereign. "You've been most helpful." We pressed on, following the path she indicated. The banks were slippery with algae, and the early light did little to pierce the growing mist. Here and there, water lapped gently against the stone, betraying no trace of the man who had moved through it. At Lambeth Bridge, a shout rang out. A constable beckoned from the far side, waving frantically. We crossed, boots echoing on the iron plates. There, beneath one of the arches, a second portrait had been found, this one lodged behind a crate of broken bricks. That it was Elira Vale. Her face had been rendered in muted tones, the expression hauntingly serene except for the eyes. In the painting, Elira's eyes were closed, lids delicately shaded as if in permanent sleep. Holmes's jaw clenched. "This is not merely artistry, it's foreshadowing." I understood instantly. He intends to kill her. "Unless," Holmes said quietly, "the portrait is already posthumous." We doubled back toward the Aramis Theatre with all haste, arriving just as the constables were unbarring the main doors. Inside, the damage from the explosion had already begun to be cordoned off, though much of the stage remained intact. Albinus was pacing the aisle nervously. "She's gone," he told us without preamble. "Elira, she said she needed air just for a short walk. That was nearly 2 hours ago. I thought she just needed solitude after last night." Holmes moved like a thunderclap, ascending to the dressing rooms in seconds. I followed. The door to Elira's chamber was ajar. Inside, the scent of jasmine and linseed oil lingered faintly. Holmes's eyes darted over the room like lightning, noting every detail: the scarf missing from the hook, the faint smudge of soot on the windowsill, the drawer pulled half open, and then he saw it taped to the mirror. A single playing card, the Queen of Spades. "Elira's final cue," Holmes said grimly. "He's taken her." I felt a cold ripple move through me. Where would he go? Holmes picked up the card. On its back, in meticulous ink, a single line was scrawled: "One last performance, where light meets illusion." He turned to me, face sharpened by revelation. "The Conservatory of Mirrors," he said. I blinked. "You mean the gallery in the one that closed years ago?" "It reopened this month," Holmes said, "as an immersive theatre exhibit, designed by Kinlan before his death. A house of infinite reflections. He's luring her, and us, into the labyrinth." He tucked the card into his coat. "Come, Watson, the finale begins." Chapter 12. The House of Infinite Reflections. The Conservatory of Mirrors loomed over Holborn like a slumbering beast. its soot-darkened facade blending seamlessly into the London murk. Built in the twilight of the previous century, it had once been a curiosity for nobles and misanthropes alike, a palace of illusion, where rooms shifted with the light, and entire corridors were made of looking-glass. Closed after a fire and later declared a hazard, it had reopened just a fortnight ago under Kinlan's quiet orchestration, where light meets illusion. Holmes murmured, staring up at the sign. He practically shouts at us. He wants us here. I don't like it, I said honestly. He's leading us into a trap. Most certainly, Holmes agreed. But a trap designed by an illusionist can often expose more than it conceals. Mon knows how to read the seams in the deception. We were let in by a shivering caretaker who, upon recognizing Holmes, stammered something about after hours, permissions and theatrical inquiries. Holmes handed him a card with Inspector Doran's seal and told him to wait outside. Under police guard, the interior was exactly as I remembered from childhood tales, a long marbled foyer with 4 branching corridors, each leading to chambers of glass, lantern light, and visual trickery. The gas fixtures had been recently restored, their glow refracted 100-fold by the mirrored walls, so that one's shadow was always doubled, tripled, warped. Holmes moved quickly but precisely, head tilted slightly as he inspected angles, surfaces, and floorboards. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, as though from several directions at once. He chose this place for a reason, Holmes said, pausing at the threshold of the eastern corridor. Each exhibit is a manipulation. He thrives here because the mirrors do what he does, reflect what you expect to see, rather than what truly is. We entered the first chamber. It was vast, round, domed, with a central pedestal on which sat a single metronome, its silver arm ticking back and forth. Around it, mirrored columns stretched from floor to ceiling, perfectly polished. Even with careful steps, our images multiplied endlessly, casting us in all directions, up, behind, beneath. Holmes signaled for silence, and then I heard it, footsteps, soft, measured, not ours. They came from the left, or perhaps from behind. The mirrors blurred the sound's origin. A shape passed briefly across the reflection, a flicker of a cloak, or perhaps a gloved hand. I called instinctively. The only reply was the metronome's metered beat. Holmes moved swiftly to the central pedestal. He inspected the base, then pried up the surface with his pocket knife. Beneath the metronome was a folded paper, another card. The Jack of Clubs. On its back, a single line. A man is never closer to himself than when surrounded by his own illusions. Holmes exhaled slowly. He's using the exhibit as a map, a performance built across 12 rooms, each its own act, and we're expected to follow. Should we notify the yard? I asked. No time, he replied. He's staging the final act as we speak. We pushed onward into the hall of lenses, where every surface was slightly concave or convex. Our limbs stretched and twisted in grotesque ways as we passed, as if reality itself was rebelling. Holmes paused at a warped mirror shaped like a coffin's lid. Here, he said, at its base, a scrap of black fabric, part of a cloak's hem, freshly torn. Elira was here, I said. She's being guided, Holmes replied. Each room is tailored to disorient us but to her. I suspect it is choreographed. He's leading her somewhere. We stepped through into the crimson gallery. Here every pane was tinted red. The room seemed drenched in bloodlight, the reflections dull and uncertain. In the center stood a mannequin, dressed in Elira's final costume from The Widow of Ravenhall, the very gown she had worn the night Kinlan vanished 5 years ago, a chilling reconstruction. She told us she never saw him after that night. I said. Holmes studied the gown closely. He pulled a hairpin from the mannequin's shoulder. Long, blonde, still, warm. Elira may have returned to the past willingly, he said grimly. The theater, the costume, the man. She has been lured back into the scene of the original illusion. Behind the mannequin, etched onto the mirror in dry soot, was another line. Only in reflection can the truth be reversed. What does it mean? I asked. Holmes stared at it for several moments, then suddenly spun on his heel. We've been walking forward, Watson, toward the center, but Kinlan's trail runs in reverse. His mind is one of retrospection. Each clue points not ahead, but behind. He led us back not to the entrance, but to the hall of smoke, a chamber with low mirrors and narrow aisles. The gaslights flickered here, making every reflection pulse. Holmes dropped to his knees and reached beneath a false panel. Another canvas. He pulled it out carefully. It was a portrait of Eleron painted in oils, but in charcoal and blood-red ink. Her eyes were open, defiant, but her mouth had been smeared with what looked like ash. Across the bottom finale, "She's still alive," Holmes said. "This is not an obituary, it's a stage direction. She plays her final scene soon, but not here." A sudden voice broke the silence. "I knew you'd come, Holmes," it echoed, rich, cultured, and unmistakable. Kinlan. The mirrors shimmered, but there was no clear image. "I have one performance left," he said. "One truth, one illusion. Elira stands between them. Will you?" Holmes didn't hesitate. "Yes." The chamber grew colder, the reflections darker. A shadow passed across the wall behind us and was gone. Holmes turned to me. "He's not finished, but he wants us close now. We're moving toward the climax. And if I'm right," he paused, jaw set, "it will happen tonight." On the stage he built, the one behind the mirror. Chapter 13. Behind the mirror's valet was nearing midnight when we stepped through the hidden panel behind the Crimson Gallery's longest mirror. Holmes had detected the outline, a faint seam, no more visible than a wrinkle in the glass. A twist of the wall sconce, and the frame unlatched with a hiss, revealing a narrow corridor shrouded in velvet drapery. Dust choked the air, and the gaslight from my lantern shimmered across the worn carpet like moonlight on old theater curtains. "Kinlan built this for privacy," Holmes murmured, "not escape. This is a tunnel of control." The passage curved gently downward, its walls hung with moth-eaten tapestry, embroidered with scenes from plays Elira had starred in. Her career played out like a silent procession. Ophelia, the tragedy of Eleanor, the widow of Raven. Each image depicted her alone, and always reaching toward something unseen just beyond the edge of the stage. "I no longer believe Kinlan simply vanished," Holmes said after a time. He orchestrated his disappearance as an act of narrative symmetry, an illusionist's greatest trick. But unlike a conjurer's sleight of hand, he didn't vanish from the stage. He built a second one, a stage beneath the conservatory. I asked, "Precisely." "A private theater, one audience member, Elira, one performance." The final reveal. At the end of the corridor was a brass door handle in the shape of a swan's neck. Holmes opened it without hesitation. The room beyond took my breath away. It was a subterranean theater, small, circular, with a velvet-draped stage no more than 10 feet across. Above it hung a chandelier of shattered glass, its prisms strung together in deliberate disarray. The walls were lined with mirrors, some whole, some cracked, angled to reflect the stage infinitely. A single velvet chair sat before the platform, and seated in it was Elira March. She wore her black stage gown again, though it hung looser on her frame than it had in photographs. Her gloves were off. Her expression was unreadable. "Sherlock," she said softly, "you're late." Holmes stepped forward slowly. "You weren't kidnapped?" She gave a slight nod. I followed him. I felt a chill rush over my shoulders. "He left the trail for me," she continued. "I knew he would. He always said I only acted well when I had something to chase." Holmes looked around. "Where is he?" Elira raised a hand toward the stage. That standing in the shadows, half visible in the cracked mirrors, was Auden Kinlan. He emerged slowly, with the poise of a man rehearsing each movement. His cloak hung perfectly. His face bore the lines of 5 missing years, but his eyes were sharp and awake. "I knew you'd come, Holmes," he said. "I counted on it." Holmes remained still. "This isn't theater anymore. It's an obsession," Kinlan smiled. "What is theater if not obsession? Obsession with truth, illusion, and control. But you're wrong, it is theater. My last act, one final performance. You were always part of the script. And what role do you imagine I'll play?" Holmes asked quietly. Kinlan gestured to the stage. "The detective, of course, the man who uncovers everything." Too late, his voice echoed across the mirrored walls. Holmes stepped up toward Elira, kneeling beside her chair. "Are you in danger?" he asked gently. Elira's eyes flickered, not with fear, but something colder. "I chose to be here, just as I chose to leave the stage. You think Auden manipulated me, but I've always known the lines. I just never said them aloud." Holmes stood. "You've been complicit from the start." Elira didn't deny it. Kinlan spread his arms. "We built something beautiful, and tonight you'll watch it collapse, because all great illusions must end in truth." He stepped onto the stage. "Let the finale begin." The chandelier dimmed. A hidden phonograph crackled to life. From the mirrors, dozens of Kinlan's reflections shimmered forward, and I, standing behind Holmes, felt the air shift. Something irreversible had begun. Chapter 14. The Final Illusion. The phonograph's voice cracked like old parchment. Alira's voice, or some ghost of it, weaving through the theatre like a memory. Her final monologue from the widow of Ravenhall spilled into the room, each word drenched in sorrow and longing. You cannot haunt a man who has made peace with the ghost. Kinlan stood at the center of the stage, arms outstretched, as though soaking in the performance. The fractured mirrors shimmered with his reflections, some whole, some splintered. Holmes did not move. I could sense in his silence the taut coil of calculation. "It's all been staged," Holmes murmured, almost to himself. Every step, every echo. Alira stood now, moving from her velvet chair like a woman breaking from a trance. Her heels echoed in that theatre of illusions as she descended the steps to the edge of the stage. "Auden promised me this would be the end," she said, not to Holmes, but to herself. "You should have stopped him," Holmes replied quietly. "No." Her voice trembled. "I needed to see it, needed to know if it was madness or art." Kinlan turned to face her, something raw flickering behind his poise. "Alira, we began this together. You knew the curtain would fall." Holmes stepped closer to the edge of the stage, studying Kinlan's every gesture. "You're not performing anymore, Kinlan. This is you, stripped of script, of lighting, of illusion. And what you've done manipulating Alira, feigning your death, orchestrating this descent into delusion is not a final act. It's a confession." Kinlan didn't flinch. "Confession is theatre, Holmes. We all reveal ourselves before the end." He reached behind the curtains and pulled forth a small velvet-covered box. Opening it, he revealed a silver pocket watch, its hands frozen at 9:17. "The moment I disappeared," he whispered, time stopped. The performance paused, but now he snapped the window. The hands spun wildly before halting at midnight. The play resumes. The chandelier's prisms flared, throwing dizzying light across the mirrors. Holmes shielded his eyes, then called sharply, "Alira, step back." But she didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Kinlan. "You promised me no one would be hurt, and no one has been," Kinlan replied. "Only truth unveiled." Holmes stepped forward. "Then tell it now, before you vanish into the illusion you've built." Kinlan turned to face Holmes squarely. The facade wavered, his eyes hollowed, his jaw clenched. "It was never about vanishing," he said. "It was about being seen, truly, not as a playwright or performer, but as the architect of something eternal." "You wanted immortality," Holmes said. "So you crafted a myth." "I crafted a reality," Kinlan corrected. "One where art and life intertwine, where disappearance becomes the grandest of entrances." Suddenly, from the wings of the stage, a second phonograph crackled, this time playing Kinlan's voice. "He who vanishes without cause is a mystery, but he who vanishes with intent becomes legend." Holmes turned toward the sound, then back to the stage. "Enough," he said. "Where have you truly been? Who helped you? Who watched as you turned your life into a riddle?" Kinlan tilted his head. "Watch, detective, watch, and you'll understand." He stepped behind the curtain again. There was a faint sound, metal grinding against metal. Then silence. "Alira," Holmes called sharply. She blinked, breaking from her daze. "Where does that lead?" She turned to him, pale now. "The old prop shaft. It drops beneath the theatre. To the tunnels." Holmes bounded forward, sweeping back the curtain, and found only a narrow shaft disappearing into darkness. No ladder, no rope. Only the soft scent of powder and velvet. "He's gone," Holmes said quietly. From behind me, the phonograph clicked off. The silence returned with eerie finality. Lira sat down again in the velvet chair. Her face was unreadable. "I think," she said slowly, "he always meant to vanish without letting me follow." Holmes looked at her for a long moment. "Then the question becomes," he said, "what did he leave behind for us to find?" Chapter 15. The ashes of applause. The theatre lay hollow in the silence that followed Kinlan's final act. Only the dying scent of greasepaint and the distant tick of Alira's discarded phonograph filled the gloom. Holmes stood by the mouth of the shaft, his eyes fixed on the darkness below. He did not speak for a long time. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he withdrew a silver coil of rope from his coat, thin but sturdy, and began fastening it to a beam above the stage. "You mean to go down after him?" I asked. "I mean to follow his performance to its true conclusion," Holmes replied. "Kinlan was never one to improvise. He has staged every step of this. There is more to find." He descended slowly into the shadows, his lantern a pale glimmer swallowed by the shaft. I followed after, my boots echoing as I dropped down behind him into a space thick with dust and age. We found ourselves in a tunnel of ancient brick, the air smelling of soot and wet plaster. Somewhere beyond, water dripped in steady rhythm, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Holmes moved swiftly but carefully, his eyes searching the walls. This theater was built atop a network of maintenance corridors and cold tunnels, some from the earliest days of the city. He said, places forgotten by the world, perfect for someone who wished to become myth. As we rounded a bend, we came upon a chamber lit faintly by a single candle stub, melted to the top of an old steamer trunk. A stack of bound pages lay beside its scripts. I realized, dozens of them, each labeled in Kinlan's distinct hand. Holmes opened one. The title page read, The Resurrection of Silas Kinlan, a play in 5 acts. He scanned the first few lines, then handed the script to me. Read aloud, Watson. I cleared my throat. Act I. Scene I. The detective descends into the underworld, guided by echoes and regret. He finds only ghosts, and in their weeping learns the final truth, that men vanish not to escape, but to be remembered. My voice wavered. This is a confession, I said. He scripted it all. He meant for us to find this. Holmes nodded. He's rewriting his life as legend. Every disappearance, every riddle shaped and recast until the truth becomes inseparable from theater. He stepped past the candle and uncovered a second trunk, this one containing clothing, coats, wigs, props, even false facial hair. Kinlan's disguises. Holmes held up a tattered wig, grey-streaked and matted. The doorman at Covent Row, he murmured, and the flower vendor by the river. I should have seen it sooner. I stared at the open scripts. He never left London, did he? No, Holmes said. He buried himself in its cracks, lived among its ghosts. Suddenly, from farther down the tunnel, came a rustle, a soft scuff of shoe against stone. Holmes extinguished the candle with a breath and motioned for silence. We crept forward, our lantern dimmed, until we reached a wider vault, where broken stage flats leaned against the walls. And there, near the far wall, sat a shadowed figure on a crate, elbows on knees, face bowed low. Holmes raised the lantern. Kinlan, he said quietly. The man did not move. As we stepped closer, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Kinlan's coat slouched around his frame, but there was no breath in his chest, no rise or fall. Holmes knelt and gently lifted the chin. Empty eyes stared up at the vaulted ceiling. A small bottle lay near his boot, its label torn but unmistakable. Poison, I whispered. Holmes examined the scene. No sign of struggle, no recent bruising or cuts. He chose this. Then, in the fold of Kinlan's coat, Holmes found a folded parchment. He opened it slowly, reading in silence. What does it say? I asked. Holmes looked at me with the faintest trace of sorrow. A final act is only powerful when it leaves no encore. I have made peace with the ghost. Silas Kinlan. There was no triumph in Holmes's face, only silence, as though some long-chased storm had finally broken it with thunder. But with a sigh, we sat there for several minutes. Then Holmes stood, replaced the note in Kinlan's coat, and extinguished the lantern. He wished for immortality through mystery, he said. Let us honor him with neither embellishment nor mockery. I nodded. What shall we tell Alira? Holmes paused. The truth, as much of it as she needs. We turned and began the climb back, toward the world above, where the applause had long since faded. Chapter 16. Echoes in Velvet and Duster. Theatre had not changed upon our return. It stood silent as before, a temple without congregation, its chandeliers dimmed to sepulchral flickers. Holmes and I stepped out from the hidden shaft and into the wings. From somewhere high above, a broken pulley creaked, nothing more than time shifting its weight in an abandoned cathedral of make-believe. Lirr was seated in the first row, still clad in her stage gown, though her face was bare of its makeup. She did not turn as we approached, only stared at the closed curtain with the stillness of someone who had been waiting her whole life for it to rise again. Holmes took the seat beside her. I remained behind, uncertain if this moment belonged to me. He's gone, isn't he? Alira asked without looking at us. Holmes didn't answer at first. His hands, gloved again, rested gently in his lap. Yes, by his choosing. A muscle in her cheek twitched. I knew, she said softly, or I think I did. Every night, he came to me in another guise, pretending to be someone new, but it was always him. The gait, the breath just before a word. He couldn't help but perform. He never followed him. I asked. I did, once, but I lost him. Or perhaps he wanted me to. She turned to Holmes, eyes glistening but defiant. Did he say anything for me? Holmes hesitated, then reached into his coat. From within, he drew the folded script he had taken from the tunnels, not the confession, but another, far older. The title page bore only 2 words in Kinlan's ink. For Lirr. She took it with trembling fingers and pressed it to her chest. Not a sob escaped her lips, but the tension in her posture melted like wax. Will the world ever know? She asked. Holmes shook his head. Some truths are better performed than told. Let him remain the echo. She nodded slowly. Yes, that's what he would have wanted. Holmes rose, offering her his hand. Come, you should not remain here. But she shook her head. I'll stay a while. Just until morning. He inclined his head, the smallest bow, and turned to leave. I followed him back through the red-carpeted aisle. Boots brushing, scattered programs, and the fragments of old illusions. Outside, the sky had begun to pale. London's fog curled along the cobbles, and the distant cry of gulls cut the silence. The world, indifferent to the dramas within its walls, resumed its quiet revolutions. As we walked back toward Baker Street, Holmes remained quiet for some time. Finally, I asked, "Do you think he was mad?" Holmes didn't stop walking. No, only unwilling to let the mundane bury him. So he created a second self, a myth, one more enduring than flesh. He fooled all of us. He fooled only those who stopped watching. After the curtain fell, I thought of the scripts, the costumes, the winding paths of the tunnels, of Alira and the final note. A man had died beneath that theatre, but another had been born and reborn with every lie he lived. What now? I asked. Holmes glanced at me sidelong. Now, he said, now we leave him to history, and let the stage fall silent. He adjusted his collar as we turned onto a quieter street. The lamplighter passed us with a nod, unaware of what we carried back with us, not the body of a man, but the burden of memory. As we reached our door on Baker Street, Holmes paused on the threshold. "Watson," he said, "what is the difference between a ghost and a legend?" I frowned. I suppose one haunts, the other inspires. He smiled faintly. Indeed, Kinlan intended to be both, and with that, he stepped inside. The sound of the door closing behind us muffled by the morning fog, leaving only the memory of footsteps, and the soft echo of applause no longer heard. Chapter 17. A curtain that never falls. The next day arrived, with no newspaper headlines, no scandalous reports, and no morning announcements. Tobias Kinlan had been erased quietly from the London stage, his final act performed beneath it in secret. Holmes had arranged with the authorities for the matter to be classified as a case of disappearance. There was no body, no crime scene that could be publicized without bringing the theatre world into disrepute. The silence, in a way, was his last standing ovation. We sat in Baker Street that afternoon, Holmes smoking his pipe in unusual solemnity. Rain tapped gently against the window panes, and a copy of the Times lay folded on the side table, undisturbed. Holmes turned toward me, eyes narrowed beneath thoughtful lids. "What do you make of it all, Watson?" I leaned back in my chair. I believe he was a man torn between worlds, between reality and illusion, a genius of disguise who began to lose the boundary between the roles he played and the man he truly was. Holmes gave a slight nod. "And what if I told you the performance is not yet over?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope. Aged, the corners curled slightly, and the wax bearing the imprint of a theatre mask. "This arrived not an hour ago," he said, handing it to me. The letter inside was addressed to Holmes, but it was the signature at the bottom that caught my breath. "Yours in footsteps and silence." T. Kinlami hands stiffened. "But Holmes, we saw him fall. The blood, the height." "Yes," Holmes replied softly, "but we also assumed he could never escape. We assumed a man with such elaborate secrets could not have planned further." He stood and paced the room. "But Kinlan always had a contingency. This note was likely prepared in advance, sent by an accomplice, or hidden in some timed contraption. He may indeed be dead, but then again, perhaps he is more alive than ever." I struggled to absorb the implications. "But if he is alive, why send this?" Holmes stopped by the fireplace, turning the note over in his hand. "To keep the performance alive, to ensure that the legend persists." "But who delivered it?" "A boy," Holmes said. "Street urchin, no name given." disappeared before I could inquire further. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson peeked her head in. "There's someone downstairs asking for you. Mr. Holmes says it concerns the new Lyric Theatre." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. When we descended, we were met by a tall, grey-haired man in a long coat, clearly of stage background, sharp-featured, with pale skin and a brooding intensity that bespoke decades under limelight. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted, his voice deep and deliberate. "My name is Elias Dorr. I was the set designer for Kinlan's productions until his disappearance." Holmes gestured him inside, offering a seat. "I thought you had moved to New York." "I had," he said grimly, "until this morning, when I received something strange in the post." From his coat, he withdrew a velvet pouch. Inside it was a single theatre ticket dated 5 days henceforth, a play titled The Final Footstep. Holmes's brow rose. "The production doesn't exist." "Precisely," Dorr replied. "But the seat listed box 3 at the Royal Electors, where Kinlan always sat when watching anonymously." He placed it on the table as if it might explode. Holmes turned to me slowly. "Watson, do you remember what Kinlan said just before he vanished?" I nodded. "He said, 'I wrote myself into silence.'" Holmes tapped the ticket. "Then perhaps this is his postscript." The three of us sat in silence, the room wrapped in the soft whisper of falling rain, and somewhere, I imagined, a velvet curtain stirred on an unseen stage, a spotlight flickered to life, and in the hush before a performance, a man waited in shadow, rehearsing lines only he would ever speak. Chapter 18. The Final Footstep. 5 nights later, Holmes and I stood before the grand weathered doors of the Royal Electra Theatre. It was just past 8 o'clock, and yet the street was silent, dimly lit by fog-veiled gas lamps. No carriages, no audience, no sounds of music or rustling pages, and yet Holmes clutched the ticket tightly in his hand, as though it were a key to something far greater than a performance. We entered through the main foyer, deserted and dust-lined. No ushers, no posters, only the echo of our footsteps bouncing across faded marble tiles. "I made inquiries earlier today," Holmes whispered. "The Electra closed 3 months ago due to financial strain. No staff remained. Officially, it is condemned and slated for demolition, and yet someone placed a ticket in Dorr's hands." I murmured. Holmes nodded. "And someone, perhaps a ghost, is staging one final act." We made our way to box 3. The heavy red curtain had been drawn back slightly, as if waiting for us. Holmes pushed open the creaking door, and we stepped into the box. The house below us was cloaked in darkness. The air was stale, thick with forgotten perfumes and mildew. We sat in the velvet seats, the stage bathed only in faint blue light from a single, overhead lantern. Dust motes floated through the gloom like fading applause. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the stage curtain slowly parted. There was no music, no fanfare, just silence, and then a figure stepped forward into the faint light. Tobias K. Inlan. Alive, whole, in full evening attire, with a single black glove on his left hand and a mask covering the right half of his face. His presence was spectral, otherworldly and, yet undeniably real. "My dear audience," he began, his voice low and controlled. "Tonight, I perform not for critics or kings, but for the only 2 minds who ever truly followed my footsteps." Holmes leaned forward, entirely still. I felt the pulse of my heart behind my eyes. "I did not die," Kinlan continued. "Not truly. I slipped through the floor of that theatre into darkness. Yes, but it was a trapdoor of my own making. One final illusion, and I emerged on the other side, free." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "The weight of disguise becomes intolerable after a lifetime. I had to vanish not to escape justice, but to escape identity. The roles became too many. I was Kinlan, the actor, Grimes, the critic, Hargrove, the patron, even the limping porter at my own theatre. I was everyone and no one. And so," he said, removing the glove to reveal a prosthetic hand beneath, "I wrote an ending, one that would outlive me, a murder that never happened, a suicide without a corpse, a vanishing that would confound even you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes's voice broke the hush. "Why resurface now?" Kinlan tilted his head. "Because a performance must have a final bow, and because I desired to see if you, Sherlock Holmes, would understand. Not solve, not condemn. Understand." Holmes stood slowly. "I understand that you constructed a tragedy, not only for the audience, but for yourself. You turned your life into a riddle, Mr. Quinlan, but not even the cleverest riddle can escape the truth. You staged your death to escape your guilt. Guilt? Quinlan asked softly. For the life you ruined. For Miss Leah Wetherell. Quinlan froze. Holmes stepped forward to the edge of the box, his voice as steady as ever. You did not kill her, but you manipulated her into believing she was losing her grip on reality. You dressed as others, stalked her with footsteps in the night, convinced her the theater itself was haunted. It was your greatest illusion, and it drove her to madness. Quinlan closed his eyes. I was trying to warn her, to drive her from the stage. I believed she was in danger. You were the danger, Holmes said coldly. You loved her, yes, but in trying to save her from your own shadows, you made her vanish into them. Quinlan opened his eyes slowly. And so I vanished, too. He stepped back from the edge of the stage. I did not invite you here to confess, Mr. Holmes. I invited you here so that someone might know the truth before the curtain falls. Then the light above him flickered and went out. A moment later, the sound of a trapdoor opening echoed through the theater, followed by silence. We rushed from the box, down the aisle, across the darkened stage, Holmes with a lantern now in hand. He knelt near center stage, where the boards were slightly raised. The trapdoor had been left open. Below it, a narrow stairwell descended into blackness. We followed. At the bottom there was a small dressing room, lit by a single oil lamp, empty. No Tobias Quinlan, only a mask resting on the mirror stand, and beside it, a folded letter. Holmes opened it. To vanish without death is the truest magic. To live without self is the cruelest. Let me be neither. T.K. Holmes let out a breath. He's gone. I looked at the mask, the abandoned room, the quiet stillness around us. Will we ever know where he went? Holmes shook his head. No, but we were not meant to. That was his final bow. We left the theater in silence. Outside, dawn had begun to touch the sky with pale amber. The city was stirring, oblivious to the fact that a man had unwritten himself from the ledger of London, and as we walked through the awakening streets, I realized that Holmes was not mourning the man who had vanished, but contemplating the illusion he left behind, a man who spoke in footsteps, who walked in every shadow, who blurred the line between performer and performance until neither could be found. Sherlock. Holmes turned to me quietly and said, he wanted to disappear, Watson, and in the end, he succeeded.